Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in video description. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to another book review. Well, sort of. It's actually been a couple of years since I did this, but today I want to do more of a ancient literature overview, or review I suppose. Today I want to share with you 3 Saxon riddles, and in order to do that, quite appropriately, I've come to the heart of Saxon Wallsend. The green here, it is thought, is where the Saxon town of Wallsend had its post-Roman start, where, I don't know, maybe a mile north of Hadrian's Wall, certainly north of the fort. And on the road just behind me, 1,000 years ago, you probably would have seen a series of small houses, long, sort of thin houses with plots of land backing up onto the road in order to sell goods to passers-by. Over there the land drops down quite quickly into what's called a dean, a sort of a small river valley, and just beyond that there is the remains of an old church that was originally a Saxon church. The dean itself actually leads out into the North Sea, so this place here was perfect to start a small trading town in the post-Roman world. So, as I say, what better a place to talk about Saxon riddles? Today I want to share with you 3 riddles that come from the Book of Exeter. The Book of Exeter is a tremendous tome of Saxon literature, written in a dialect of Old English, and the book actually contains around 95 riddles. The Saxons and the Vikings loved riddles, partly as a way to sort of pass the time and challenge themselves mentally, but also it was a way of sort of reflecting on an artifact or an object, on how it's made, and the innate beauty in that sense of the process of making an artifact or object. Incidentally, today I will be reading riddles from a choice of Anglo-Saxon verse, published by Faber and Faber, with translations by Richard Hamer. Broadly speaking, the translations are very similar from translator to translator, but it's always good practice to highlight who has been doing the translating. For each of these 3 riddles, I shall recite the riddle and then give you a couple of seconds and then reveal the answer. If you don't want to know what the answer is, I'll have a symbol on screen when I'm talking about the answer, and also actually talking about the riddle in respect to the answer, so you can sort of mute the video, or I'll put a timestamp below so you can skip from riddle to riddle to riddle, and then maybe come back once you've had a thought about what you think the answers might be. Okay? Okay. So, riddle number 1 is as follows. I was a soldier armed, but now a proud young warrior covers me with gold and silver, with twisted rings of wire. Sometimes men kiss me. Sometimes by voice I summon to the battle the loyal friends. Sometimes a splendid steed bears me across the mark. Sometimes a seahorse, gay in its colours, ferries me across the waters. Or a maiden, ring adorned, fills up my bosom. Sometimes on the tables I have to lie hard, stripped, without any head. Or sometimes, beautiful, bedecked with trappings, I hang upon the wall where heroes drink. Sometimes, when warriors wear their noble war gear on horseback, then must I, adorned with treasure, swallow the wind puffed out from some man's breast. Sometimes I summon by my proclamation proud men to wine. Sometimes my voice must rescue the stolen property from enemies, put foes to flight. Now, find out what I am. So, that riddle, what could it be? A couple of seconds I'm going to give you, and then I shall reveal the answer, so get ready to mute if you don't want to know. It is a horn. Yes, a horn. Now I'm going to just go back through that riddle a little bit, just to talk about in some respects, the value of these riddles as a way into the mind of people in the past. The horn is described as a soldier armed. At one point it was the point of attack on top of a cow, or a bull rather, or well, cows and bulls in fact. But now a proud young warrior covers me with gold and silver. The trappings may be on a drinking horn or a blowing horn, in fact, and both types of horn are described in this riddle. Covered with twisted rings of wire. Sometimes men kiss me to blow, perhaps, the horn. Sometimes by voice I summon to battle the loyal friends. Sometimes a splendid steed bears me across the mark, so perhaps the leader of a war band is riding a horse and will have the horn at his side. And sometimes a seahorse, which is actually a kenning. A kenning is a very old term for a sort of a mini riddle. A seahorse is actually another way of saying a ship, a seafaring ship. Gay in its colours, so with coloured sails, ferries me across the waters. Or a maiden, ring adorned, a woman covered in jewellery, probably a wealthy wife, fills up my bosom with mead, presumably, for drinking. Sometimes on tables I have to lie hard, stripped, without my head. Or sometimes, beautiful, bedecked with trappings, I hang upon the wall where heroes drink. This is describing the way in which people 1,000 years ago made use of horn. And I'm tempted to wonder if the hard, stripped, without my head could be referring to the use of horn implements. It's entirely possible that that could be a reference to horn spoons, for example, but maybe I'm pushing it a little bit there. On horseback, then, I must, adorned with treasure, swallow the wind puffed out from some man's breast. Sometimes I summon by my proclamation proud men to wine. It's drinking time! And sometimes my voice must rescue stolen property from enemies. So if there's been a thief, perhaps, you blow the horn to get attention. Put foes to flight. And that's really one of the key purposes of a horn, is to intimidate and to scare people, especially in a battle scenario. So yeah, a little insight into how people probably on this very street 1,000 years ago thought about horn. The next riddle is related to the first riddle, but if you haven't checked what the answer is, or if you haven't figured it out yet, then I won't spoil the first riddle answer for you. But it is nonetheless an interesting riddle. So, riddle number 2. My dress is dark, but my adornments are bright, and glittering, and red among my clothing. I lead astray the stupid, urge the fool to rash adventures. Others I restrain from useful journeys. I have no idea why they, thus mad and having lost their minds, their deeds gone wrong, should glorify to all my wicked ways. For this they shall have grief, when the high Lord brings forth the dearest treasure. If they have not then ceased in this bad counsel. What do you think that might be? I'll give you a couple of seconds. And the answer is wine. Yeah, wine. Isn't that interesting? And again, in terms of an insight into how the Saxons viewed wine, it is very interesting. Now, there are a couple of other potential answers to this riddle. I'll talk about that in just a second. But I think it probably is, in fact, wine. My dress is dark, but my adornments bright. Wine in a bottle. And glittering and red among my dark clothing. If you ever look through a wine bottle, you probably recognise that description. I lead astray the stupid and urge the fool to rash adventures. Yep, I've been there. Others I restrain from useful journeys. I have no idea why they, thus mad and having lost their minds, their deeds gone wrong, should glorify all my wicked ways. And that's a very good point. You know, that whole thing of the night after, no, the morning after the night before, people go, oh, I was so drunk last night. And people continue to sort of glorify their drinking habits, even though actually it leads them down very dodgy paths. Well, it seems that was a Saxon problem as well. For this they shall have grief, probably at least a hangover, I imagine, when the High Lord brings forth the dearest treasure, if they have not ceased in this bad counsel. Now that actually is probably a double reference, a double meaning there. It could be a reference to the end days, the sort of rapture. If you don't stop your drinking now, then come the return of God or whatever, you will have grief for that. You'll be held to account for your slovenly drunken ways. But it could also actually be a reference to the idea that a lord in a feast does give gifts at a certain point of the feast. It is traditional for a leader to share out the treasures from raiding or from a warband amongst people in the hall. And if you are in fact unconscious because of wine, then you're going to miss out, aren't you? So that's probably a double meaning there, or at least to my mind anyway. If they have not ceased in this bad counsel. So yeah, this is a warning as much as it is a tongue-in-cheek reflection on the perils of wine. Now, interestingly, there are two potential other answers here. One of them being night, the other one being gold. In so much as there is aspects of the interpretation and the translation that could, for example, refer to the sun and the soul in elements here. Again, we're talking sort of idioms and how individual people decide to translate the riddle. But I think that the reference to red among my clothing, adornments bright while the dress is dark, I think that does describe wine in some sort of container, doesn't it? So yeah, there you go. Riddle number 2, wine. And finally, riddle number 3. This one is not as connected as number 1 and number 2 are to each other. This is a completely different type of artifact, but I think a very interesting riddle and an interesting description as well. I am a lonely being, scarred by swords, wounded by iron, sated with battle deeds, wearied by blades, often I witness war, perilous fight, nor hope of consolation, that any help may rescue me from strife, before I perish among fighting men. But hammered swords, hard-edged and grimly sharp, batter me, and the handwork of the smith bites in the castles. I must ever wait a contest yet more cruel. I could never in any habitation find the sort of doctor who could heal my wounds with herbs. But cuts from swords ever increase on me, through deadly contest, both by day and night. What do you think that was? I'll give you a few seconds. And the answer is a shield. A shield. Now, I think in some respects that's probably quite obvious from the description, but I love the reflection. This is the as I was saying earlier on, the sort of the almost fetishistic reflection on an artifact, really focusing in on what's it like to be that artifact, and reflecting almost on its philosophy. What is this shield thinking as it slowly but surely meets its end? It is nonetheless a doomed artifact. Shields are made of wood, they're easily replaceable, they're not going to be repaired, and one day they'll simply be shattered on a battlefield, and that is in here. I love it. I am a lonely being, scarred by swords, wounded by iron, sated with battle deeds. Now, sated, satisfied with battle deeds. So it only finds its purpose in battle. This shield is not useful in everyday life. It's only satisfied on the battlefield. Sated with battle deeds. Wearied by blades, often I witness war. Perilous fight, nor hope of consolation. That any help may rescue me from strife before I perish among fighting men. The shield knows it's doomed to perish amongst fighting men. It's going to one day be shattered by a hammer, by an axe or something. It's not intended to last forever. But hammered swords, hard-edged and grimly sharp, batter me, and the handiwork of the smith bites in the castles. I must ever wait a contest yet more cruel. If the shield survives, if I survive as a shield, I'm only going to see another contest, another battle, another cruel encounter between fighting men. I could never, in any habitation, find the sort of doctor who could heal my wounds with herbs. This is really cool as well. It highlights that fighting men and Saxons and Vikings and, you know, frankly all human beings have had medical practitioners, and this shield is like, oh, I won't be healed, even though I am covered in cuts. Cuts from swords ever increase upon me, says the shield. And actually that's also a good reference to the fact that the shield would often be covered with maybe like a leather surface on front of the wood. So you would see cuts accruing on the shield like cuts in skin, but this skin cannot be healed by a doctor. Through deadly contest, both by day and night. A shield. I absolutely love it. And actually, tell you what, I'll give you a bonus. One more riddle, actually. This one is related to the shield, and I think it could be just as interesting. So, riddle number 4. By foot I travel, and I tear the earth, the grassy fields as long as I have life. But when my spirit leaves me, I bind fast the dark Welsh slaves, or sometimes better men. Sometimes I give a noble warrior drink from my breast. Sometimes the haughty bride treads on me. Sometimes the dark-haired Welsh maid brought from afar carries and presses me. A foolish drunken girl at dark of night wets me with water, sometimes pleasantly, warms me beside the fire, sticks in my bosom her wanton hand, constantly turns me round, strokes me all night. Tell me, what am I called? What, while I live, may plunder all the land, and after death give service to mankind? Now, this is related to the previous riddle, so if you know the answer to that one, it is related. And the answer is leather. Yeah, leather. Now, as a Welshman, I'm ever so slightly offended by the references here, but actually it really highlights that to the Saxons, the Welsh or the Welcha were in fact foreigners. They were a source of slaves as well. Leather. Yeah. So it starts out as an animal. By foot I travel and I tear the earth, the grassy fields as long as I have life. So it starts out as a cow perhaps. But when my spirit leaves me, I bind fast the dark Welsh slaves, or sometimes better men. So it's saying that instead of having clothes made of cloth, as perhaps a non-slave, the Welsh only deserve to wear leather and skins, the Welcha, and that's their adornment. And sometimes better men, perhaps as a boot. Sometimes I give a noble warrior drink from my breast, as a wine sack perhaps, or a water bag. Sometimes the haughty bride treads on me. So leather was clearly used amongst the Saxons as some sort of, I don't know, like a carpet, a temporary cover for the mud perhaps on their wedding day. The red carpet perhaps. Sometimes the dark-haired Welsh maid brought from afar carries and presses me. So again, a reference to Welsh slaves having been brought up from Wales, presumably captured in some sort of warband, is responsible for producing the leather, for actually carrying and pressing the skin into leather. A foolish drunken girl at dark of night wets me with water. Again, a bit of an aspersion on the Welsh slave there. Sometimes pleasantly warms me beside the fire, sticks in my bosom her wanton hand, and constantly turns me around and strokes me all night. That's a reference to, well, I think it's a bit of a double entendre, intended to get slightly drunken people listening to the riddle going, oh really, oh, but actually it's describing the process of making leather, processing it through water, turning it over, scraping off the hair and the fat and the sinew in order to produce it. Tell me what I am called. Challenges the riddle. That while I live, may plunder all the land, as a cow going around nibbling on all the grass, and after death give service to mankind, as leather. In fact, as leather. Leather. There you go. A bonus riddle for you. 4 Saxon riddles in the heart of Saxon Wallsend. I've enjoyed this. Hopefully you have as well. If you have any thoughts or comments, please do comment below. And if you want to hear more interesting literature or reflections on literature along these lines, do let me know. I'm more than happy to stray away from the Saxons. The previous one was about the poem called The Ruin, which was a Saxon poem, I think actually also from the Book of Exeter. But let me know below what you think, and I shall follow suit. As ever guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.